Hi everyone. In this program, what we're going to show you is how do you print an integer. As if you have watched my last video, I showed you how to print a string that time. Now this time I'm going to show you how do you print an integer. Let me start a new file. So as usual, the same thing. We'll have two sections, dot data, dot text area. Now you can write dot text first and then you can write dot data afterward. There's no problem. You don't have to follow the order exactly like the way we are doing it here. Dot data and then dot text. No, you can just write dot text and then dot data afterward. But I just have an habit of declaring all the data first and then to start with text area. So let's say I'll just show you how do you print a string here. Okay. Now let's say you have a variable. Let's say I'll say num. Okay, num1. So I have a variable here num1 and I want to store a number in this variable. So how do you declare it? So when you declare a integer number or like a kind of variable, so dot, this time you have to declare it as a word. If you see this one, that's called word here. Okay, so either word or you can say as half. Okay, so the only difference is that is 32-bit number and this is 16-bit number. So normally you'll be working with bigger numbers at a moment and you don't have 64-bit in this assembly language. So you're going to say, okay, dot word. So there's not the point, there's no such things called integer here. But actually, if you want to store an integer, this is what it means for integers. So you say, okay, I want to define a variable num1, which is of type integer. This is the meaning of integer. And let's say I want to the value of the integer, let's say is 254, for example. You can store any value, whichever value you want to store it. Let's say 2500 or whatever. So this is one variable here. Now, if I want to print this variable, okay, how would you do in assembly language? So let's show you first example, guys. As you have seen in the first video, in order to print an integer, the system call number is 1. And you have to load that number in $v0. So in v0, you load a number 1, which you're telling the computer, okay, I want to print an integer. So 1 meaning, if you store in v0 meaning, you're printing an integer. Let me write a comments here. So this is a call to print an integer. Now, whatever you printed, I told you, whatever you want to print it, you have to load that information in argument register like A0. So now I'm going to say, okay, load word in $A0, comma num1. Now I'll make you understand. You're saying, okay, this num1 meaning 2500. Okay, load it in $A0. Now, actually what I told you, the word, basically we're calling saying as word, but is actually an integer. So when you're telling them to load it, this integer, so in other words, you're saying load word, that load that word, this number, load that number in A0. So you load num1, which is a word, or kind of you can say integer in A0. So note it, you're not saying li, guys. You're not saying la. Now why you're not saying la? Because we're not telling them that, okay, we're not saying that load this address here. We are telling them, no, take that whole number and store it in A0. So take this whole word. Now last time in the string, why did I said load address? Because string is a very big character. So many characters are there. You can't load all the characters in one particular A0. So we generally load the address of that string. But here, this is not such a big number. This whole number can come in A0. So you're saying, okay, load word, meaning load this number in A0. And the moment you set it, you say syscall. And when you say the word syscall, computer will execute it. Now, let's say, if you want to terminate the program nicely, so you can say $v0 as usual, give 10 and say syscall. Now, this is you're telling the computer to make a proper exit call. So when you load 10 in v0 and do a syscall, meaning you are telling the computer for exit. Okay, and this is how you print a number. Now let me show you quickly. So file, save as. So I'll say printing an integer. So I'll save it. And as you know, like you just have to go and assemble it, run it, and you see 2500. There you go. So they printed up the number. Okay, so this is how you print a number. Now let's say, for example, let's go a little further. You know, you want to print like a message. The number is, and then the number. So if you want to do like that, let's create a message. So you can say, okay, I have a message and I want to print a message like this. I want to say like the number is and then this number. Not just like dumping 2500. We don't know what this is. So you can say the number is, okay, or let's say, for example, I want to say I want to print the age of a person. So you can say age of the person, okay, is, and let's say we say, okay, age is 40. So what we not generally want to do is I want to print this message and then I want to print this number after that. So what you're going to do, guys, here, so what we're going to do is we say, okay, in V0 you load a value 4, and when you load a value 4, meaning you want to print string. Now I'd already told you that you have to, once you're telling them to print a string, you have to load the address of this one, because such a big one cannot be stored in A0. So you're going to say load address $A0 and MSG. So you're saying, okay, load the address of the message, this message, in A0. And then once you say the word syscall, meaning execute it now. So basically, guys, what they're going to do is they're going to print this, the age of the number is. And remember one thing from my last video, the cursor remain there. So when you print that number, the number comes exactly after that. But let's say, for example, if you say, okay, I want this message, but that age I want in new line, new number. What you can do is you can give /n here. That means after printing this, they will print a new line so that this number will come in the next line if you want it. But let's say I want in the same line, okay? So I just take it out and have a look how it works now. Assemble, run it, and now see nicely they're saying the age of the person is 40. So you're printing a string along with an integer. This is how you print an integer. Okay, so this is what I showed you how to print an integer, guys. Now just go a little bit more further. Let's say sometime you're not declaring, you don't want to declare an integer value in a variable like this. Sometime, you know what, like you can store a number in a register directly and you can print it. So you know, you can do it this way. For example, li, now load immediately. I mean, load immediately. Now there are many register, guys. You need to see this right hand side. These registers which are there, I have explained to you in the first video, but I'm just letting you know that from T0 to T7, okay, from T0 to T7, and then T8 and T9, this 10 registers they have given you to store any data. You can also store some data in S0 to S7. So there are so many registers for you to store any numbers. Okay, integers numbers. Remember, you're only going to store the registers integer numbers, or you can store the address of the memory. That's it. You can't do anything. You can't store float numbers. You can't store double numbers. For those things, I'll be explaining in the other video. So what we're going to say is, okay, let's say, for example, take any register, say T0. And if you want to load 2500, so if you want to load any value in any register, you can use a command called load immediately. So if you don't want to use any variable and you know that I know the number and I want to load something immediately in some register, so this is the way you're going to give this. Li, that means load immediately 2500 in T0. So you can take any register you feel like, guys, any register. So the moment you loaded it, that's done. So it's what they will do is they'll store this 2500 in T0. Now when the time comes for printing, let's say I want to print this number, okay, or let's say this number is age 40, for example, and I want to print this number like the way I printed here. Now remember, whenever you print, that number has to, which is stored in T0, has to come in A0, guys. It has to come in A0. If you don't store it in A0 and if you tell them to print it, they won't print it. It has to come to A0. So now, if you have a number in one register, which is T0, and before you print, you need to move it to A0. So whenever you have to move from one register to another register, you're not going to say any more LW, load word, because you're not getting from variable. If you're getting from variable, then the command is called LW. So you have to use now called move. So you're saying, okay, move from, this will be now dollar $T0. So you're saying, okay, move from T0 to A0. And then if you say call is going to do the same job. But the thing what we have done differently is that you're not storing a number in any variable. You're storing a number in a register, which you can do by a command called load immediately. Load immediate means I know the number and I want to store it in directly in register. So this is the command. But when you want to pick up the data from a variable, then you have to say load word. Now let's see, I'll show you the same thing. It works exactly the same way. Assemble it, run it, and see the age of the person is 40. Exactly the same thing. Okay, so this is how I taught a very small program how to deal with numbers, meaning integers, guys. In the next video, I'll try to show you how to deal with floats, how to deal with double, and other things.